May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be always acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. This is hilarious, by the way, whoever put this up here. Good morning. Good morning. What a great day to be with you in Greeley. Beautiful, beautiful Sunday morning. We couldn't pick a better day. And I want to thank you, Stuart, for extending this invitation for me to be with you this morning, to serve with you. It's a privilege and an honor for me. Thank you. And as the bulletin says, my name is Dana Solomon, and I am one of those little bivocational, sort of different kind of priests. And what that means is I made my living in the world in healthcare chaplaincy, in hospitals and in hospices and elder communities. So I paid the bills with that, and then I was an assistant at St. Stephen's in Longmont for many, many years. And so I had this perfect ministry gig, I always thought, do the privileged work of chaplaincy during the week and then just show up to church on Sunday. It was perfect. And I was thinking as I was preparing for today, I was a student here at UNC years ago, and when I did the math, I realized it was the 1970s. Long time ago, way, way back in the day. It's great to be here with you this morning. As my friend Bill Kendall talked about last week, your community is in a liminal space. And from what I hear, it has been for some time. And so I wanted to start out just by affirming you and acknowledging that liminality is not always comfortable. It's not an easy place to be. So I want you to know my prayers are with you as you continue to discern what's next for your parish, who your new leader will be. As someone once said, community is an elixir of the soul. So may you continue to be an elixir to each other and for each other as you march forward in this process. And I also know that we have an important commissioning this morning with Terry as your new lay pastoral leader. So I decided I wouldn't preach my normal 30-minute sermon. I'm glad you laughed, because my thought is, my philosophy, if I can't make a point in 12 or 15 minutes, I probably can't make the point. So I will keep it brief. A few words about the gospel this morning, and as Bill said last week, now that we've reached ordinary time in year B, you are going to get a healthy dose of Mark. And so we begin with that today for the next about 6 months. And you get a little John sprinkled in there, but mostly Mark. So, the gospel prompted me to think about Jesus this week, and there's something different about Jesus in this gospel that I want to point out, and that is sort of the angry Jesus. Now, we don't normally think about anger being a great thing, right? It's, in fact, one of the 7 deadly sins, they say. But here it is, front and center for us in this gospel today in 3:5. So when Jesus asked if it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath, you heard his accusers say, and he looked at them in anger and grieved at the hardness of their heart. He looked at them in anger. And in response to his anger, we hear that his detractors began to plot how they might kill him. Now, Jesus' anger in this passage is one of 4 in Mark. He gets angry a few times in Mark's gospel. And I love that about Jesus. I love that feisty Jesus, the radical feisty Jesus. I know we prefer Jesus that is the Jesus with the lamb on his shoulders, or the Jesus that encounters the forlorn woman at the well, or the Jesus that weeps for his friend Lazarus at his death. We sort of like those better little cushy stories, but here we find that Jesus is angry. And he's not angry because the Pharisees seem to be following him around all over rural Galilee. It doesn't seem like he's angry about that. They're trying to, it seems almost like trip him up, goad into a fight. But that's not it. The hardness of the heart that angers Jesus is when he has over and over tried to do the thing that lifts people up, that affirms people, that gives people agency, that shows the depth of their goodness. He sees them as beloved people. So when he gets angry, he excoriates the religious professionals who don't see that. And he calls them hypocrites. He calls them fools, blind guides, and a brood of vipers, literally offspring of snakes. And in a few more chapters, we're going to see the really crazy Jesus go off when he cleanses the temple. This morning, we hear these two vignettes. In the eyes of the Pharisees, Jesus was breaking the Sabbath. And the Sabbath, of course, is to do no work. It's a day of rest. It's a day of prayer. It's a day of meditation. So the first, we hear Jesus is with his poor. These are not well-fed people. They are poor, hungry people. They're traveling in the middle of nowhere, and hungry, they pick grains to eat. Not to be annoying or obnoxious, they're hungry. Then in the second vignette, we hear Jesus is in a much more public place, the synagogue, the place of power. And he performs again an act of healing with the man's hand that is withered. So the first rebuke by the Pharisees, Jesus responds by sharing a story which you heard about King David doing something even more sacrilegious, eating the food that only priests were supposed to get to eat because, again, they were hungry. And in the second case, he asks his would-be accusers, is it lawful to do good and save a life on the Sabbath? Or should we let someone suffer? So as an aside, I was wondering, if the Pharisees were plotting to kill Jesus on the Sabbath, wasn't that also sort of a violation of the law? But maybe that's a sermon for next time I'm here. Excuse me. Both of these disagreements that Jesus is having with the religious authorities summed up this pronouncement midway through the gospel. The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind the Sabbath. And that's what's starting to rile Jesus up. That's what's building his anger. This hardness of heart is what angers Jesus. Hardness of heart angers Jesus. As one commentator puts it, the biblical witness is clear. God gives us the law to help us get the most out of life, and in particular, to help us help each other. So simple, so beautiful. By looking out for each other, by taking care of them, and by extension, taking care of ourselves. I want to kind of highlight this man who has the withered hand and his circumstance, because we don't really think of it, I think, sometimes. But just picture this man who has a withered hand and think of what that meant to him. So it meant he could not worship in the temple because he's deformed. It meant he probably had difficulty earning a living where it was manual labor. It meant he suffered disgrace. As you know, people thought when there was a deformity, blindness, deafness, that it was the fault of the person or the person's family that they had sinned. So he probably heard aloud in his hearing people questioning, what evil did you do to deserve this fate? This is a man who is suffering. And Jesus knew it and took action. That's why in the Jewish tradition, they take such care to mention that the Sabbath is not just for the well-off who can afford to take a break. It's not for the high and mighty, folks. For that matter, it's not just for humans. The commandment says that your donkey and your ox need a Sabbath too. And so do your servants, your staff, your employees, and even your out-of-town guests. Sabbath is for you, your children, your friends, your strangers, the stranger at your gate, and even for your animals. Are you getting the picture? Sabbath is like grace. It's for everyone. Sabbath is like God's love. It's for everyone, no exceptions. Jesus is feisty. I love that. Jesus angers at hard-heartedness. So I told you I was going to be short. I'm going to ask you to join me in being a feisty Jesus follower. Reject hard-heartedness. You know, it's so easy in our climate to say, oh, those hard-hearted other folks. Oh, we can do that so well. But I'm going to ask you to do this differently. We are called to do the incredibly arduous work of rejecting hard-heartedness in ourselves. I bet you know, just like I know where my heart is hardened. I want you to imagine just for a few moments what it might be like to have a softer heart, a more open heart, a more genuinely accepting heart. What would it be like for all of us? So, my friends, I'm going to offer this. Let's take a Sabbath from hard-heartedness. Amen.